New Balance racing shoes have always reminded me of shoes for faster training sessions and generally for less advanced runners. These shoes always lacked that special something that would make me consider them among the top racing shoes. However, last year the American brand introduced quite a few changes and it looked like we finally might be able to talk about competent racing shoes from New Balance. How did it turn out? Here's the New Balance Super Comp Elite V4. Hi, I'm Michał, an amateur runner deeply passionate about running shoes. On this channel I review gear, shoes and discuss various running related topics, so if this interests you, please subscribe and comment. It really helps me reach new people. Thanks. Before I get into my running experience with the New Balance Super Comp Elite V4, I need to mention that I received these shoes directly from New Balance, but no one influenced the opinions presented here and no one saw this material before you. I'm also not affiliated with any store or brand producing running shoes. The New Balance SC Elite V4 is a racing shoe with a carbon plate, but for many runners it will also work well as a shoe for faster training sessions and long runs with marathon pace segments. The knit upper is breathable, translucent in the midfoot area. The material here is thin and allows plenty of airflow. It's very similar to the material used in the New Balance Rebel V4. On the sides we have slightly reinforced logos, and while the heel counter isn't super plush, there is some additional padding here. This isn't a very common practice in racing shoes. The heel counter itself is reinforced roughly halfway up, but keeps the foot well in place. The lacing is standard with thin laces that hold the tie well. They never came undone on their own. The tongue is very thin, typical for racing shoes, but for some reason it's not gusseted, which causes it to shift sideways during faster running. At least that's what happened with my feet. The midsole is fuel cell PBA foam, New Balance's most responsive offering, enhanced with a Energy Arc carbon plate, whose shape promotes acceleration rather than stability, as was the case with Super Comp trainers. There's plenty of foam, but within World Athletics guidelines, exactly 40 mm under the heel and 36 mm under the midfoot, giving us a 4 mm drop. The outsole is covered with the rubber in the forefoot and around the heel sides with a typical road running thread pattern, and the rubber itself is quite durable. After over 100 kilometers I did in these shoes, I don't see any signs of wear on the tread. And now the weight. In the reference size, the SC Elite V4 weighs 237 grams. In my size 45 EU it's 265 grams. Quite heavy for racing shoes, but I'll talk about whether and how this affects running in the next section of this video. Speaking of size, I choose the Elite V4 in size 45, which is standard for me, and I must say I had a bit less room in front of my toes than usual, so I would recommend going up half a size. Let's move on to my running impressions. Since the SC Elite V4 is mainly a racing shoe for longer distances, I expected pleasant running at half marathon and marathon pace, and that's exactly what I got. The midsole is quite soft, but not excessively so. The stiffness of the carbon plate is clearly noticeable, but thanks to this, the toe-off is noticeably more energetic when we need it. During my tests, the longest training session was a half marathon distance built from easy running and intervals at half marathon pace. In such a setting, the Elite V4 performed very well. Acceleration to the target pace was pleasant, but I must also note that the higher the pace, the more concerns appeared in my mind. I'll talk about that later in this video. There isn't that typical carbon plate feeling of bouncing on trampoline. The plate effect is more subdued, muted, but definitely noticeable. This also means that the Elite V4 handles easier training sessions quite well. They don't push forwards as aggressively, which in my opinion makes them a really good choice for long runs in marathon training. From this perspective, this model offers the kind of feel that, honestly speaking, I expected from the SC Trainers V3. Obviously, for short, easy training runs, these shoes are definitely overkill, but for 15K runs, 15k plus, especially 25k plus. I think they are perfect, but particularly if you also need to do segments at target pace. I count the midsole softness as a plus. While it might not be the top level of softness I've encountered in racing shoes, it's still sufficient for me. The foot feels comfortable, doesn't sink excessively, and if someone heel strikes, they can feel quite secure here. The slightly plush heel counter also does its job. It might not be a typically racing design, but it definitely increases comfort. Another plus is stability. The New Balance SC Elite V4 is a racing shoe with quite good stabilization. In this market segment, it's generally hard to expect miracles in this regard, but this model definitely stands out among the competition. This also makes it a much more beginner-friendly shoe. It's harder to hurt yourself in it, especially during a 4+ hour marathon. Though, do I recommend using carbon racing shoes in such a situation? Not really, but if you must, the Elite V4 is good in this occasion. The foot doesn't collapse inward as aggressively because we also have a slightly raised foam profile under the midfoot, which somewhat alleviates issues known to pronators. And the final advantage is the appearance. I know looks don't run, but for many people, including me, appearance is an important factor, and here I have nothing to criticize. The shoe's design itself is very clean and simply beautiful, and if you get a good colorway, it's even better. I received the shoes in the mango colorway and they look phenomenal. One of the better variants that New Balance has released for this model. And what about the downsides? For carbon racing shoes, these shoes surprisingly don't handle intervals and tempo sections at 5-10k pace very well. I don't feel that aggressive toe-off like in other shoes of this type. In my case, these were paces of around 4 minutes per kilometer and faster, but for more advanced runner it might be 3:20 or something and faster, or even different. This is very individual matter. Just accelerating isn't very easy either. While it went very well up to a half marathon pace, going faster made me feel like I had to put more energy into accelerating than, for example, in the Diadora Gara Carbon or Saucony Endorphin Elite 2. This is certainly also affected by the second minus, which is weight. 265 grams in my size 45 EU or 11 US for racing shoes is very heavy. It's even more strange because the New Balance Rebel V4, the training shoes complementary to the Elite V4, weigh about 235 grams in my size, so it's quite unprecedented in the running shoe market for a training shoe to be much lighter than racing shoe. 230-240 grams is kind of the norm among racing shoes, and there are much lighter models. It might seem like a small thing, 40-gram difference per pair of shoes, but over long distances these 40 grams accumulate and definitely contribute to slightly more fatigue than in competitor shoes. The next downsides are minor issues, so the first being the lack of gusseted tongue, which causes it to shift too much to the sides during running. I was very surprised we don't have this here, as it appeared in the New Balance Rebel V4. Once again, the training shoe has an advantage over the racing shoes. Very strange. And the last thing is the issue I mentioned in my first impressions, chafing on the toe. Again, this is an extremely individual matter and there's a very high probability that nothing will chafe you, but it did chafe me and I can't omit this information. I also can't omit that for subsequent training session I covered that sensitive spot with a band-aid and had no problems afterwards. Once the wound healed, I also started running without the band-aid and the problems still didn't return, which means roughly that the upper just needed to break in slightly and adapt to my feet. Nothing wrong with that. Fitting the SC Elite V4 into a rotation built from New Balance shoes is fortunately very simple. They occupy the racing shoe slot. This probably won't surprise anyone. In the daily trainers category, I see two choices depending on what you are looking for and what kind of runner you are. For the lighter runner, my main choice would be the New Balance Rebel V4. Great, light and dynamic training shoes in which you can run both easy training sessions and much faster ones. For a heavier runner or one needing much more cushioning, I would recommend the New Balance 1080 V14. Soft, comfortable, admittedly more focused on easy mile logging, but if you are determined, you can do something faster in them too. In the long run shoes category, the choice is quite obvious for me. New Balance Supercomp Trainer V3, lots of foam and a stabilizing carbon plate. These two elements make long runs much more pleasant. And what about the faster training? Here I would choose the New Balance Supercomp Pacer V2. It's simply a very good option for dynamic running, but they are not as advanced as the SC Elite V4. Okay, we have a rotation consisting of 4 shoes. Now it's time for slimming it down. What would I give up if I wanted to have 3 shoes in my rotation? First, I would drop the Pacers. You can handle fast training sessions in either the Elites or the Rebels, so there's nothing to worry about here. Let's go further. A 2-shoe rotation. I would give up the Elites discussed in this material. The Rebels can handle being budget racing shoes, and the SC Trainer V3 will do the job for long training runs where we need comfort. And the final step, a 1-shoe rotation, though that's not quite a right word anymore. And here's a small surprise, because I would choose 1 shoe based on the target distance. If you're training for up to a half marathon, the Rebels are your friend. If for a marathon, I would choose the 1080 V14. Why? Because long running is much more pleasant in them, and you can do some faster training in them too. New Balance SC Elite V4 costs 280 euros. For what we get, I think it's a bit too much. I see 2 competitors in a similar budget that outclass New Balance's offering in almost every aspect. The first one is the Saucony Endorphin Elite 2. These are even softer shoes, but I feel that they provide greater sense of dynamics and are definitely lighter. You can get the Endorphin Elite 2 for 300 euros, and soon there will be a review of them on my channel. And the second competitor is well known and liked Adidas Adios Pro 4. They cost 250 euros, so 30 euros less, and you get shoes from the world's top tier. Fantastic Light Strike Pro Foam, carbon rods, comfort and dynamics at the highest level. The New Balance Supercomp Elite V4 is the best racing shoe produced by New Balance so far. They've improved many shortcomings of version 3, although they haven't avoided a few drawbacks. Nevertheless, I think it's a good option for a half marathon or marathon. That's where they perform best at long distances. For shorter races, I would look for something else. This will also be a good proposition for the first carbon-plated shoes. They forgive quite a lot and handle easy paces quite well. However, it's worth remembering to strengthen our calves and Achilles tendons before we get tempted by carbon plates. If you've made it to this point, thank you for watching. I encourage you to subscribe, like and comment on this video. I'd love to hear what you think about these shoes. Also, check out my Instagram and TikTok, and I will see you in the next video. Bye!